underground, brother.
This is about a decade ago, and it still scares me. TL. Doctor at the bottom. My great-aunt lived alone in a small, two-floor Cape house one town over that my grandfather had built her in the 1940s. She had a tiny spare bedroom and writing office upstairs. My great-aunt was a nun and teacher, and would often write friends, former students, and work on a book of her stories she never quite finished. My mother and I would visit from time to help take care of chores in and around the house as years went on. When I left for college, my mother started visiting more often. No sense in us both being alone, she told me. While I was away, my great-aunt started showing signs of dementia that progressed steadily. It started with stories she'd tell us for the 1000th time, so we already knew them well. One story would start when she and my grandfather were kids, but then resolve somehow when she was an adult. Basically, she'd combine two unrelated stories into one, which would leave her confused. She also started forgetting to eat, take her meds, and would crank the heat in summer to the point where she'd be dehydrated. Some days were worse than others, so when I finished college, we started visiting nearly daily as she absolutely refused going to an assisted living home. We set up Meals on Wheels and asked some of her friends and former neighbors to come by, so we weren't the only ones visiting. My mother and I convinced her to start writing in the kitchen, rather than upstairs, to prevent a fall on the steps. Without a reason to go upstairs, we shut off the old second-floor heaters and closed the overpainted, squeaky door to the stairs. We'd find the door cracked open every so often, but my great-aunt insisted she didn't go up anymore. We weren't the only ones stopping by, so maybe someone fetched something upstairs and forgot to close it. Again, my great-aunt was a nun, and around the holidays, she'd roll out the more religious stories and talk about God a lot. One day when I was visiting her alone, she started reflecting on her life, mortality, and when the man upstairs was going to come for her. I changed the subject, as it's uncomfortable. But, over time, she started talking more about when she'd die. He's going to come for me soon. I don't know when the man upstairs will do it, though. Trying to reassure her, Auntie, I'm sure you have many years left. God isn't coming to take you anytime soon. With the most serious expression I've ever seen on her sweet old face, she said no, not God, the man upstairs. As around this point in time, she started seeing things, like flashes or spiders that weren't there, and a little boy in her living room that only she could see, even when my mum or I were visiting. I chalked this up to the dementia. Later that week, snow fell, so after shoveling myself out early, I went to my great-aunt's to shovel her walkway for my mum who'd visit later. After shoveling, I called her from my warm car so she'd know it was taken care of. I also said I wasn't coming in as I had to go to work, and she thanked me. I drove off and noticed I had forgotten my rock salt I had used on the walkway, so quickly circled the block and picked it up. As I was reaching for it, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. The second-floor light in the old writing office had turned on. I glanced quickly, then pretended I didn't see it. I got in my car, and went down the road a short way, confirming in my mirrors it was on. I called my mum. Can you call Auntie and see if she has company over? Don't say I asked. And let me know how long it takes her to pick up. My mom called back almost immediately. No, she doesn't have company over. Not this early. And she picked up right away. Mom, you need to call the police. The light upstairs turned on after I talked to her. There's no way a 95-year-old lady hung up, hustled upstairs, then back down to pick up your call. There was no phone hooked up on the second floor. As my mom called the police, I called my aunt. Hi Auntie, I almost forgot. You have a doctor's appointment today. I'll come pick you up. We can grab a hot chocolate before we head over. I parked my car in front of the house and acted as normally as I could. It felt like an eternity helping her get her housecoat on and out the door. As I turned the lock, I heard footsteps above us in the second floor room where I saw the light turn on. I helped her into my car, never looking at the house, too scared for what I'd see in the window. We went down the road a bit and I called my mum. She was already on her way over and said the police would be by shortly. I told her where I parked. She arrived there and the police weren't far behind her. I flagged down the cop before he got closer and told him what I saw and heard. He radioed for 2 more cars. My mom stayed with our great-aunt to keep her calm as police surrounded her house. I gave them the keys to the doors and 2 went in as the 3rd cop and I stayed outside. After a few tense minutes, the 2 officers returned with a disheveled, gaunt man in handcuffs. "Oh. The man upstairs," my aunt said to my mother on looking as they fought the crazed man into the back of one of the cruisers. My great-aunt had apparently let the disturbed, homeless man in, thinking he was Meals on Wheels and he had been secretly living upstairs as my great-aunt was confused if he was even real. When we were allowed back in, we saw that the upstairs was a mess. Garbage, rotting food stolen from the kitchen. The amount of filth was scary. The creepiest things were the notes. Written many, maybe hundreds of times, in different inks and pencil scrawlings around the writing office window that overlooked her walkway was "Go away. Don't stay. I'll come down the back of the door to the stairs" had notes too. "She can see me but you don't. And I can see you." It was clear he had probably wrote notes each time someone visited over weeks and possibly months. My great-aunt was temporarily shocked, but it was quickly forgotten given her condition, and would ask about the man upstairs less and less. The homeless man, who was in poor physical and mental health himself, was hospitalized and passed after a few weeks later into the winter. He had escaped the hospital, but his body was found the day after. He died having succumbed to the cold and exposure. My mom and I told Auntie a couple weeks later when we found out. "Oh, I know. He told me last night. He's upstairs again but you can't see him now." At just that instant, my mom and I heard the door to the stairs squeak open. TLDR: a homeless man was living in my elderly great-aunt's house. We thought it was her dementia. Edit: no one was upstairs the last time. Just spooky weird timing. The door cracked open at that moment. This was years ago. I was probably around 15, I'm 22 now. My grandma had a pacemaker and had some complications. She was sent to this old veteran hospital and was confined for 8 days. The hospital alone was already creepy. I always felt uneasy during the times I watched over my grandma. So the hospital allows at least one family member to watch over their relatives and stay the night. Since my dad didn't really care much, that's another story. I offered to watch over my grandma. She and I were pretty close. Now, I loved staying in my grandma's ward. It was lively. There were at least 15 people there, but the ward was really big. So while my grandma rested, I made friends. Someone even brought a portable DVD player and we all watched a movie. What I hated about the hospital was the fact that it was like a labyrinth. You can easily get lost, especially at night. Anyway, on day 3, I was still getting used to the hallways. My aunt stayed until evening and let me go around to buy myself some food. And since the place was like a maze, I got lost. The next thing I know, I ended up in the morgue. There was a guy there, probably the one in charge of the place. As I make my way out, there was this figure. It was a black shadowy figure. It was walking down the hall and out of curiosity, I followed. The figure went to a ward and disappeared. I stood in the hallway completely confused. Then after a few seconds some guy went out calling for a doctor, shouting about how his dad was no longer breathing or something like that. I felt chills and I ran down the hall to go back to my grandma. Took me half an hour to find my grandma's ward. I never told anyone what I witnessed. I mean, it would be inappropriate. So I just kept my mouth shut. On day 6, my aunt left me with enough snacks and some fruit for my grandma before going home for the night. I waited for my grandma to fall asleep before sleeping on my chair. As I mentioned, the ward was really huge and spacious. The windows were large, so we didn't need any air conditioning or fans because nights they were really cold. I always covered my grandma with 2 layers of blankets and I slept with a jacket on. It was the same cold night and it was quiet. Everyone was asleep. The nurse woke me up a few times here and there for my grandma's hourly medication, and by 2 a.m. I was no longer sleepy. I was playing on my phone when the clock struck 3 and I felt a soft breeze on the bed behind me. I turned and saw the black figure again. I almost dropped my phone. The old lady on the bed was sleeping and her son, or grandson was sleeping soundly too. I looked away, not wanting to see whatever was going to happen. By 5 a.m., when the son woke up and the nurses are rounding for the patient's meds, they found out that the old lady was already dead. After that I never saw the figure again. Maybe it moved to a different ward. I don't know. But I was glad that it didn't take my grandma at that time. Thank you for watching my video. I would really appreciate it if you would leave any feedback on how I can improve my videos. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss any of these spooky stories.